My name is Meg Hyland, and I'm the creator of a project called Women of 1000 AD. This is an art and research project that I've been doing since January of 2018, and the goal is to draw historical reconstructions of women who lived all around the world in the year 1000 AD or CE, and to show just how different women's lives could be all around the world at the same time. I'm very happy to have been asked to create this video for the Middle Ages for educators, and I hope to give you an overview of how to use my website in ways that can stimulate class discussion or research. So what you're looking at now is the Women of 1000 website. So what you'll find on this website then are illustrations of women from all around the world in the year 1000. There's a couple different ways you can use the website. There's an About section, which would give you an overview of how to navigate a given woman's page. Another way you can navigate the website, now I've preloaded these so that you don't have to sit and wait for the images, but you can see there's a tab up here, the Women, and you can navigate to a specific woman's page. They're organized by continent. So this is an example of a continent page. Say you went down and clicked Asia. This is the page it would take you to. And so there you can see people can scroll, and if you click Read More, it'll take you to the woman's page. Another way you can navigate on the website is just by clicking the words The Women, and that will take you to this page that has a slideshow. So if you click the slideshow, it'll cycle through all of the different women. And if you're curious and want to click on one, you just click directly on the image and it will take you to her page. The final way to navigate the website is to use the map, which is also up in the top bar. You can see there's a map, and if you want, you can hover over the names of particular women. You can also collapse the list so you can see the full world map. And this can give you a really good idea of the scope of the project. And if you click on one of these blue paddle pins, you'll get a description, a brief description of the woman who then you can navigate to using the menu. So here's a sample page. This is the first one I created, Say Shonagon. At the top you'll have the woman's name. And then the first thing you see is the illustration of the woman. And underneath that is a link to recommended listening. But then you get into the story. The length of these really varies. The earlier ones are often shorter. And then after the story, which tells what we know about the woman and explains the illustration, you see the map, which you can zoom in and out on. Then there's a few comments from me about the process of creating the picture. And then at the bottom, this will be of particular interest, is the resources section. So it's not laid out like a traditional bibliography, but it's designed for anyone who wants to learn more about the woman depicted or women in her culture in general. So as you can see, there's a mix of scholarly and non-scholarly resources, which is intentional because this site's designed to engage the public as well as students. The methodology of how I research these can be broken down into 4 categories. The first are women who are textually attested. So Say Shonagon would be an example of that. We know when she lived, we have writings that survive from her, and contemporary accounts that also mention her by other writers. Then there are women who are archaeologically attested specifically. So for example, this illustration is called The Mother of Pueblo, Bonito. This is set in what's currently New Mexico. And this is a reconstruction of 2 carbon-dated skeletons that were found in a burial site in the oldest part of Pueblo Bonito, the largest building in the Chaco Canyon complex. Then there are women who we don't know their names, and my drawing is a hypothetical reconstruction based on a general historical or archaeological phenomenon. So for example, this picture is of 2 lesbian women living in Baghdad, and it's based primarily on the work of Sahar Amer, who has a great article about medieval Arab lesbians and lesbian-like women, which is linked to here. And then the final category for my methodology is oral history. So for example, this illustration of the Haudenosaunee woman, or possible Huron woman, Jigonsase, is recorded in the oral history of the Haudenosaunee because she was so foundational to their confederacy. So as you can see, there's a lot of different methodologies at play here, and I think each presents its own strengths and challenges. So if you're going to be using my work in a classroom, I think discussing these different methodologies and having students look in the resource section to see how I reconstructed these women could be really fruitful. It encourages students to think about the different types of evidence available to study the past and the challenges and potential problems inherent in historical reconstruction art. Another challenge is reconciling non-Western oral histories with a Western view of time. So, for example, the foundation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy has been variously dated anywhere from the year 900 to the 16th century. But when I was at some Haudenosaunee museums talking about Jigonsase, they were pretty consistent in dating it to 1000. And a final challenge, even textual sources, as any historian will tell you, are not perfect. The challenges in reconstructing women's lives from sources mainly written by men, or reconstructing commoners' lives from sources written by the elite. So, for example, say Shonagon will occasionally write about commoners, but in a very biased way. So for the final part of this video, I'd like to give a sample of how you might use this website to spark discussion among students or as a resource. I'm going to be comparing and contrasting two illustrations of mine. One is from Sudan, Martha, Mother of Kings, who was a Nubian queen. And the other is called The Pilgrim of Pariti, which is of a woman in Bolivia in Lake Titicaca. The reason I've chosen these two to compare and contrast is that obviously my project in a lot of ways is about giving representation to women visually. Women have often been neglected from visual representations of history. For example, Sarah Sheridan has written a great book about commemorative practices in Scotland called Where Are the Women?, looking at how little we memorialize women in history through art compared to men. But these two women are an interesting comparison because both of them, in their own way, left their own image of themselves, which has come down to posterity. So that can provoke a really interesting discussion about how women from history sought to memorialize themselves, why they were doing it, and what those memorials can and cannot tell us about themselves. So Martha is the first one here. As you can see in this illustration, she's depicted looking at a mural. This is of the Nativity in the Church of Faras, and she and two other women are looking at this mural. Martha's pretty incredible because we actually have an image that she likely commissioned of herself right around the year 1000 on the cathedral wall. This is a picture of it. You can see she's crowned next to the Virgin Mary, who's also crowned. And it's really amazing the level of detail. You can see her earrings, her hair, and there are a lot of women's images on this side of the church, and each one is different. So you can really see the individual differences. So here's Martha, and then here are three other women who are portrayed in the cathedral. So for this illustration, I was actually able to recreate three women who were individually memorialized on the wall of the cathedral. And Martha is also thought to have commissioned this portrait of the Nativity. And Mary's wearing this incredible royal crown, which is very similar to the one Martha depicts herself wearing here. Martha was a Nubian queen. Her title was Nonena, or Mother of Kings, or Nonen, excuse me. It's thought that she was queen during a particularly contentious time in the royal succession. For those who don't know, the Nubian kingdom of Makuria had already been Christian for centuries. So Martha is here named after the biblical Martha. And in leaving this image, she's trying to establish that Mary has royal power as the mother of Jesus. And that's the same type of power. It kind of justifies the power that Martha has in the kingdom. It's thought that the bishop at the time, whose portrait is on the other side of the cathedral, might have been trying to establish a rival claimant to the throne. So here we have an example of a woman leaving an image of herself for posterity as part of making a bold political statement. She's at the height of her power as her son has just become king, and she's trying to leave her mark by aligning herself with the Virgin Mary in this holy place. The Pilgrim of Pariti also left an image of herself, but under very different circumstances. Just to show you how far we're moving across the world right now, here's where Martha was, right on the modern-day border of Egypt and Sudan, whereas now we're all the way on the west side of Bolivia at Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca is a really important holy site in the Andes, and the island of Pariti was a pilgrimage destination, and it was excavated, this incredible find of a bunch of ritually broken effigies of individualized people. And it was dated really specifically to right around the year 1000. That's when the researchers estimate that the pottery was made. So here you can see there are really different faces. So like Martha, we have an example here where the women are probably actually being represented as individuals. You can see I've recreated the pink shawl that she has around her head. And you have a couple different images of women. This one you can see a lot of the details that I then took onto the belt and the side of her shawl. We're kind of in the twilight of what's called the Tihuanaco Empire. They were based in Tihuanaco, which is just a little bit south of Lake Titicaca. And there's archaeological evidence that this island had been a major pilgrimage site for Tihuanaco elites. But around the year 1000, the elites made a bunch of effigy pottery of themselves. There's also a lot of men. And they smashed them, broke the temple, and then buried it all in a trench. And this is a pretty common way of abandoning religious sites in the Andes and even in the wider Americas. But it is unusual to have these specifically individualized effigies included in that. And it's thought that it represents the elites who are actually abandoning the site. The Tihuanaco Empire was in a period of real instability and decline. But the point is that this is a much more melancholy creation of a woman's own image compared to Martha, who's more triumphant and challenging in imprinting herself on the cathedral. The pilgrims who represented themselves in these broken bits of pottery in Pariti, they were abandoning the site because they were having to withdraw to Tihuanaco. It wasn't safe, or they weren't stable enough to be able to come out here anymore. Both women left images of themselves in a sacred context. We know the name of one woman, Martha, because it was written here, but the Pilgrim of Pariti, we don't know her name, and we don't know her story. One saw her political power rising and sought to assert it, while the other was in danger of losing power and had to abandon the religious site. So I hope you can see from just comparing these two examples, lots of interesting discussion questions could arise. Both of these are areas which are not traditionally considered part of medieval history's remit, which is a real shame for Nubia because it was a medieval Christian kingdom. They were Oriental Orthodox. So showing students examples of types of Christianity, which they might not be as familiar with, is really valuable. And talking about how Africa was much more connected to European and Asian civilizations than we're often led to believe. And when it comes to South America, it raises the really interesting question of the global Middle Ages. To what extent is it useful to use the term medieval to describe places that the traditional medieval world didn't know existed, and vice versa? The Americas are often kind of constructed as ethnographically timeless, that the way they were when Europeans found them is how they'd always been. In a project like this, and looking at a specific dated moment of change in Bolivian history can really challenge that perception. And then looking at these examples more specifically, you can ask questions like, what avenues did elite women have to memorialize themselves? Why might they want to? Why is it so rare to have this for women compared to men? How do we commemorate women today? Again, I mentioned that book by Sarah Sheridan. She's not a medievalist, but it's really useful thinking about commemorative patterns and how gender plays into that. Why don't we see more images of Nubian queens and the Tihuanaco Empire? I think there's a lot of value in prompting these questions about the history of the discipline and the way it's been dominated by white narratives, male narratives, elite narratives, and look at the ways that a project like this can address some of those problems, but perhaps raising new problems of its own. After all, I'm a white woman depicting these people who are not from my culture, so that can also be an interesting thing to talk about. Thank you for listening. Thank you for having me, and I hope you find the Women of a Thousand project interesting, inspiring, informative, or at least sparking discussion and thought. Thank you very much.